working and why to accelerate and spread creative and proven approaches to more rural places in the country. And we also want to help public, government, and philanthropic organizations better understand how to more effectively invest in rural America and rural innovation. So this series, The America's Rural Opportunity, is one way that the Rural Development Innovation Group is trying to do that. Now, today's session, every one of our ARRO, we call it ARRO for short, every one of our ARRO sessions focuses on a particular thing in like a particular sector, like manufacturing or infrastructure or something in rural America. And today's session and topic will focus on two-generation approaches to help families living on the margins get ahead in rural America. What you will hear today especially illustrates three investment principles that are near and dear to the Rural Development Innovation Group. And let me just mention those three. We have like 8 principles, but I want to mention 3 for sure. One is that investment in entrepreneurial people is as important as capital investment in rural America. That you can do all the business investment and looking at systems that you want, but if you're not also investing in people, you will not achieve prosperity over time. And that includes people who want to work and want to get ahead, who are not yet able to fully participate in the economy because of obstacles in front of them. The second principle is that short-term investments will not yield desired long-term results. It's taken us several decades, if not more, to get to the situation we're in a lot of rural places in this country, and you cannot have one transaction that's going to change that situation or one investment, that you have to stick with this over a long period of time. The two-generation approach to combating family poverty and helping rural families get ahead is a long-term approach, and it's one that evidence is showing is working. The third is that community-centered intermediary organizations are essential to successful rural community and economic development. And you will hear today from 2 of those innovative rural intermediary organizations that are making the two-gen approach work with partners in their communities. So what are two-generation approaches? You're going to hear more about this from Jeannie in a minute. But they refer to practices and policies that do not just attempt to transact with parents or children in siloed ways. They work with whole families to meet whole families where they dream. Two-gen approaches put the family at the center. They design and integrate their services and interactions to, number 1, remove barriers that keep families from getting ahead, and number 2, to encourage and support families in setting goals and meeting those goals. You're going to hear a lot more about this in a few minutes, and I do want to acknowledge that our colleague program at the Aspen Institute, Ascend, is the field and thought leader on two-gen in America. I encourage you to find out more about two-gen approaches by going to their website, which is ascend.aspeninstitute.org. Pretty easy to remember. My program at Aspen, CSG, has had the opportunity to facilitate peer learning for several multi-year cohorts of two-gen sites over the last several years. Because of our rural focus, we've come to know the ins and outs of mounting two-gen efforts from some pioneering rural two-gen sites. Today, we're going to hear from 2 of those pioneers, 2 what I call rural intermediary action heroes, 1 aspiring two-gen family, and we have the family here, actually, not just the mom, and a two-gen policy pioneer. I want to mention that even in our in the live stream audience, we have a lot more two-gen actors and wannabes, but we also have right here in the room John Fox Rubin from the Valley Settlement Project in Colorado, also a rural two-gen pioneer, and there he is. He can wave his hand for those of you in the room. You can talk to him. But we want to start with some data, and data that will ground us in the reality and challenges facing rural families who are striving toward the economic mainstream, but who, for a whole range of reasons, they're just surviving in rural America. And for that, we're going to turn to our frequent ARRO partner, the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire. I want to pause just for a moment and thank the Annie E. Casey Foundation for supporting Carsey, supporting Aspen CSG, and the Rural Development Innovation Group in bringing you this data analysis and for underwriting this particular ARRO session on rural 2Gen. So let me also mention that if you're in this room, you know there are about a number of handouts on your chair that some of the speakers may refer to. If you're live streaming, the handouts were emailed to you this morning, so you can look there. But if you watch this later, after it's over, if you're watching it on video later, you can access them from the video page some way. I'm not sure how, but I'm sure it'll be clear. If you want to share your thoughts on today's discussion with others, we encourage you to do so. Please use the hashtag rural innovation, hashtag rural innovation, and that's also the way to send in a question. Whether if you're in the room, I can walk a mic around to you. But if you want to send in a question, please use hashtag rural innovation, and people will be running those questions to me. So you can also follow us on Twitter at Rural Innovators. All right, everyone got all those? Okay, good. Now let's start with the data presentation. Joining us by video this time is going to be Jessica Carson, who is the research assistant professor with the Vulnerable Families Research Program at the Carsey School of Public Policy, University of New Hampshire. To the video.
I'm Jess Carson. I'm a research assistant professor at the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire. I'm going to present some data today on family and work in rural places. And I'd really like to thank you for allowing me to share these data with you, even though I'm sorry to miss the event in person. Hoping that these data can help shape your conversation today. And I look forward to connecting with you. If you have questions that come up after today's event, I would be happy to stay in touch. Let's move on to the data. All right, so let's go through some of the data on family poverty and work in rural places. First, we're going to start by looking at the distribution of family income among rural and urban households. So the two bars here indicate the share of families in each of those income categories listed on the right, percent of income as a share of the federal poverty line. So the key takeaway here is the share of rural households versus urban households in those two kind of blue chunks on the bottom. And those are the folks who are living below 100% of the federal poverty line and between 100 and 200% of the poverty line. So those are the families that we could think of as both poor and as low income. And we can see that there's a significantly larger share of rural households in those categories than in urban households. So 38% of rural households are living below twice the federal poverty line versus 29% of urban households. And here we're focusing on measures, official measures of poverty, which is a useful barometer of well-being, but it really doesn't indicate how well a family is able to actually make ends meet. And it certainly doesn't shed light on the nuanced experience that is living in poverty. So for instance, the neuroscience literature shows us that the timing of poverty experience matters. So for instance, folks who are very young children in the 0 to 3 age range, the deprivations that are faced in that period are particularly important. And poverty experienced at very young ages shapes educational, economic, and health outcomes well into adulthood. The depth of poverty matters. So there are substantially worse outcomes documented for those who are living further below the poverty line. And finally, the duration of poverty experience matters. So long-term persistent poverty is worse for children and families than is a brief spell of living below the poverty line. Now we're transitioning to look specifically at family income among rural households. So these three bars here, the first represents all rural households as was seen in the previous chart, while the other two represent families with children and households with very young children, so children under age 6. And the key takeaway here is that across these three bars, we have an increasing share of households that are in those poor and low income, those dark blue and lighter blue categories. So when we get to looking at rural households with young children, half of them are considered poor or low income. And that's particularly salient when we remember what exactly the federal poverty threshold is. So we're talking about just under $25,000 for a family of 2 adults and 2 children. Digging a little bit more deeply into that group of families. So who are the poor rural families who have young children, the folks who are in that darkest blue category from the previous slide? So those families are clustered in the Midwest and in the South. They're disproportionately young. About 1 in 5 of those householders is aged 18 to 24, compared to 7% of householders who are rural families with young children who are not poor. They are majority white. More than half of them have at least some college education, and half of them have a working householder, with another 10% have a householder who is looking for work. So we're not talking about folks who are kind of without diplomas or jobs. So what's going on with these families? Many of them have a decent education and at least one worker in the household. What are the challenges for these rural families in maintaining and finding and maintaining work? First of all, what's the rural effect? Well, the nature of rural economies is such that there's been a lot of economic restructuring in recent years, with significant changes to opportunities for work. Many times new jobs aren't as good as the historical rural jobs have been in terms of pay and consistency. Um, we also know that the infrastructure for supporting new and emerging jobs in rural spaces may not be prepared to kind of prepare young people for the next stage of rural work. So, for instance, schools may not be prepared to educate their graduating seniors on how to attend college, because historically, college wasn't the only path to finding a good and stable job in a rural place. We also know that wages are lower in rural places, and that full-time job opportunities may be less often available than they are in rural places. Particularly among young people aged 20 to 24, we have very low shares who are working full-time year-round, and that speaks to the availability of good, consistent work in rural places. Finally, transportation is a real challenge, and transportation challenges matter everywhere, but they really matter in rural places. So while we only have about 7% of rural households who have no vehicle available, that doesn't speak to the reality of being able to reliably commute for low-income families. So ownership statistics don't reflect on the challenges associated with covering car's insurance costs, or covering the gasoline costs. And so just because families own a car doesn't mean that that's actually a reliable way for them to be able to find and maintain work. To illustrate some of these challenges, I'm going to share just a few quotes from a project that we did over the course of 5 years that helps to better understand how rural families make ends meet. So we talked to folks in 2 rural communities in Union County, which is remote and has a history of folks patching together formal and informal seasonal job opportunities, and in Clay County, which is a retirement destination that has a very heavy service economy, including accommodation, food services, and retail jobs. In both places, the result is this sort of multiple job landscape that has implications for everything from a steady paycheck, but also the practical challenges of daily life, like securing consistent health insurance coverage and being able to find adequate childcare. This also sort of has implications for this larger community-wide struggle for rural places to be able to entice young families to want to stay there and raise their families there. If the job opportunities are not consistent, then that has real implications for families who may want to move away. Thinking about the role of early childhood care and education in allowing families to find and maintain work, I thought I'd say just a little bit more about the state of that in rural places. So we know that early childhood care and education is scarce. Finding childcare slots is extremely difficult, especially for parents of infants and toddlers. Securing any slot is hard enough, but when considering non-standard hours and varied schedules that many low-wage workers face, finding consistent childcare can be impossible. We also know this care is expensive, that while poor families are often eligible for subsidies, in reality, these supports only reach a fraction of those who are eligible. And folks are spending significant shares of their income on childcare. So the federal government has established 7% as a threshold for affordability. And we know from some of our research at the Carsey School that poor families spend significantly more than 7% of their income on childcare. Finally, we also know that early care and education can be extremely variable in quality, and that's particularly important in rural places where rural parents are shown to more often choose family or home-based care over center-based, because that type of care may not be as strictly regulated as center-based care is. And this can again speak to the availability of childcare options in rural places, that rural parents may simply have fewer center-based options from which they can choose. It's important to note that while we're talking about the quality of work and the quality of childcare, these aren't necessarily separate issues. Childcare is a very low paid profession with little mobility, and that contributes to its scarcity. So these issues are really bound up together and have real implications for very young children and for rural families. I hope the data that I've shared today have been informative and will help to shape the conversation for the rest of today. I also hope that folks will be comfortable reaching out if I can be of further assistance. If anybody needs more data, I'm happy to talk more or has questions about the data that I've shared today. And I just want to thank you again for allowing me to share these data with you. I hope the rest of the day goes great.
Thank you, Jess. So now let's get the panel started. The way our session is going to, our panelist has to present in turn, then he'll ask a few probing questions of his own to dig a little deeper. Then we'll have a block of time at the end for questions from you in the room, but also from people out in the live stream audience. So start sharing your questions using hashtag rural innovation and question early and often. So now let me introduce our moderator, Renee Bryce Laporte. Renee is an independent consultant who's worked on a range of family and community asset building strategies over the years. He and I go way back to the days when Renee was at CFED, now called Prosperity Now, coordinating the first national demonstration on individual development accounts back when they were an innovation in the world. I remember that day, and you can visit Renee at his website, bryce-laporte.com, to find out more. But to assure the audience that Renee has earned some rural street cred, I will offer that he is one of the very few people from outside the community who has been in Nauvoo, Alabama twice in the past year. And I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to Renee.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of rural places. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Janet. And can everyone hear me? Great. And thank you for the opportunity to come here back to the Aspen Institute, where I once worked, actually twice worked. And I'm happy to be here, not just for that, but also because we are talking about rural America. And while I know in urban places, and I guess some rural places, sometimes the conversation about rural America focuses in on some of the challenges and hardships, but we're talking about some of the innovations and really positive things happening in rural America. And I'm also happy because we've got a great panel here. We'll be sharing some stories and some lessons for all of you to inhale. So I want to start with Jeannie Chaffin here, and Jeannie is a consultant herself, but she also has worked in government. Was running Office of Community Services, OCC, at the Administration for Children and Families at the Department of Health and Human Services. And we're going to take the word 2Gen, which may seem jargony to you, and bring it down to where everyone can get at it, both the title and the elements therein. So could you provide us with a definition of what 2Gen is?
I will. Definitions are kind of tricky, but I'm going to give you some components to think about. And by the time we're done today, you're going to see several examples and talk to somebody who's been part of a 2Gen approach. So I think maybe we'll make it real for you before you leave today or before you sign off. I want to draw your attention. If you're on the web, you should have this available, and those of you in the room have the Ascend definition or the Ascend model for what is 2Gen. And there are a lot of different approaches and systems and policies that you can look at and think about if you're trying to help families trapped in poverty to move out and to move up the economic ladder. Some of those approaches may focus more specifically on parents, and so you can see there's kind of a continuum here, and it highlights parent-focused approaches, and that might be training. If you're out there in a community college, you're certainly serving parents who are trying to get an education. And on the other side, you might be involved or familiar in your community with programs that address children, maybe early childhood or pre-K, that kind of thing. But what we're talking about with two-generation approaches is serving parents and children together at the same time. And that doesn't mean an organization that's just operating some parent programs over here and some child programs over there, but really taking the children in those systems and thinking about how do we support their parents who are workers, their parents who maybe are living below the poverty line and struggling to make ends meet and have many different kinds of pressures and stresses and fears on them that are really blocking their ability to move out of poverty. So we're talking about serving parents and children together in very high quality, intensive ways. So 2Gen isn't necessarily just a light touch. We really want to provide supports and interventions that can really move people up and out and break that cycle of poverty. And I hope we have time today, Renee, to talk a little bit more about the science later. But I want to just sort of highlight some things. Outcomes that are focused on the child, the family, and the adult. Really aligning an array of services, employment, early childhood. On the bottom of your Ascend model there, you see several different components. We call those elements or cogs of 2Gen. And they're everything from social capital, health, and behavioral health and education for the parent and the child. Were you going to ask me a question?
Well, I was going to ask you. I was going to go. You mentioned, could we talk about the science? You sort of briefly just talk a little bit about what's the science or the urgency that sort of backs up what 2Gen is.
Right. So, we saw some of the statistics that Jessica highlighted about the number of young families that are in poverty in rural places. And when you think about, and she even began to mention some of this in her comments in saying that, the deeper the poverty, the longer the poverty for young families, it can be very, really get under the skin, right? It has long-term impacts. The neuroscience research tells us that adverse child experiences in very young years, have lifelong impacts. So that sort of tells us that we need to intervene early, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
And in addition, and I think it'd be an error not to mention that place really gets into all this too and really complicates some of the issues. And so, in different places in our country, mobility is different. The ability of parents for children to move out of poverty and do as well as their parents can vary from place to place. And some of our communities, mobility, sort of getting up and out, is a lot easier than other places. And so if you take the neuroscience and you take the science about place, what we're learning about the impact place has, you really begin to say, hey, we've got to intervene early. Mm-hmm. And we've got to really wrap a set of customized supports around parents if we want to break that cycle of poverty.
And can you talk to us in a minute or so about, tell us about the growth of 2Gen field in the recent years?
Well, we're here at Aspen, and over the last 2 days, there's been, I think there were hundreds of people assembled for a 2Gen convening that Ascend organized, and the growth in the field has really been exciting. Ascend has a network of folks that are learning and experimenting and innovating around 2Gen. I think there's 300 different organizations on lots of different platforms, community colleges, Goodwill, Community Action, that are sort of working on 2Gen. There's been an investment from the federal government in a lot of different ways. When I was in the Obama administration with my colleague Doug O'Brien, who's here, there was a rural demonstration on how can we demonstrate what 2Gen might look like in rural places. And you're going to hear more from Charlie in a moment, who was one of those 10 communities. A lot of the work has been in urban places, but we're starting to see more work definitely in rural places. Philanthropy has been a part of this, and many innovative community-based organizations. And that's great because we need all those sectors to make this work.
Absolutely.
You cannot do two-generation sort of as a standalone single program. No one program, no one organization can do this. This is really an approach and a mindset. And the more that we think about that, the more successful we can be, I think.
Thank you, and you nicely teed things up for us. We'd like to go and talk to a couple of practitioners who are launched into the two-gen approach and are making it work on the ground. The aforementioned Charlie Martin-Berry, who is the Executive Director of Community Caring Collaborative. That was good. And down East Maine, and you'll explain a little bit more about what we mean by that.
Sure, I'm happy to. So thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about rural, because I love to. And I'll assure you that Washington County, Maine is rural. I'm going to assure you. We are, to take you there, we are the sort of last stretch of coastline on the eastern seaboard before you get to Canada. It's like the last quarter of the Maine coast, and we call that part of Maine, down East Maine. And it's a big county, but we don't have a whole lot of people, about 32,000 people in the county, mostly living along the coast. And there are about 10% of the community is Passamaquoddy Native American, living in the eastern portion of the county. And then there's a smaller percentage of Latinx families living on the western side of the county. It's beautiful there. It's beautiful, absolutely. I was telling Renee, we see the sun rise first, right? And we have many assets. And we also have some really complex challenges. And so one of the fun things about rural is the innovation that we can do and the way we are working together to get at some of those tough nuts, right? The data that Jess shared is really familiar data for our home and for our families. So the economy is also similar to what Jess described. We're this natural resource-based economy. It's where a lot of lobsters come from, a lot of blueberries, a lot of forestry happens there. More and more is happening in health and social services. But these are hard jobs, like hard, physically taxing, seasonal, temporary, tough work. And what's happening in terms of some of the challenges and the work we're trying to come around is just some of the data is difficult. We have low educational attainment, high rates of poverty, high rates of substance use and substance use opioid overdose. And what we're experiencing, and I think a lot of rural America is this shrinking workforce, and it's tied very much to our aging workforce. We're getting old in Maine very fast. So the median age is 47 in our county, and what's happening is there's this shift of all the baby boomers, right? Like my parents' age, moving out of the economy. We don't have enough Gen Xers or millennials to replace their contribution to the workforce. And so that is a huge demographic challenge in our rural place. And we know that there aren't enough people in the trades or in health and social services just to keep our economy vibrant. And so our organization, the Community Caring Collaborative, over the last 10 years has really been working to support collaboration across social services, early education, health, behavioral health, to make sure that people in the county who are vulnerable to some of those difficult conditions are doing well. And we've been doing programming with partners, building shared programming to make sure that people can get the supports and services they need. But what we heard and what we've been hearing in the context of all this sort of data is that low-income families want to go to work. They want jobs. And so we're like, okay, we want to build supports and services, and we're hearing, you know what, we actually really just want to be able to pay our bills. And so the Community Caring Collaborative has experience in bringing together organizations to build new programming, to train service providers, to really understand the impacts of some of these difficult situations on community members. And we have relationships to those community members and to their frontline workers. So we are hearing what is missing, what is working, what people are hungry for, where the motivation is.
So was there a specific catalyzing situation that sort of caused you to move to the two-gen approach?
Well, that connection between the situation was listening to parents, and they're saying, yes, we are struggling around some things. We need access to services, and we want jobs to be able to pay our bills because we know that our financial stress is stress for our children. They know that. And so their desire to get jobs, and parents were really specific with us, they knew they needed to go to college in order to get into those careers where they would have that kind of sort of sustaining family wage and take the stress away. So we were able to sort of identify that perhaps some of our toughest workforce challenges really, it's just what Janet said, it's about making sure that people can access the economy by removing the barriers to college or to jobs. Might be solved that way by really investing in families who were struggling but totally motivated. And so it was listening to families that really was the catalyst. Mm-hmm. And our work as a collaborative is to do that listening and then respond, like build the response. Because the community members who were struggling are very much the authority in the solution that will work for them. Yeah. And so it's within our, it's our obligation to use the resources and influence that we have in order to build out that solution. So there was this beautiful sort of human capital, right? This human resource that could help families because they do want to do better. That was very clear, and it might also help the region, right? Mm-hmm. That came together. It's coming together nicely in rural Washington County. Do you want to hear some details about the program itself?
I do. I mean, actually, if you talk a little bit about your organization's mission and just how it fit. And,
yeah. So our work is to support collaboration that really results in new resources and it increases hope, health, and well-being for people in our county. And so increasing collaboration has really looked like programming over the last 10 years to support really vulnerable children and families, babies impacted by the opioid crisis, improving learning environments for children who may be struggling at home or in their childcare setting or in schools. But this response was about listening to parents who really wanted economic opportunity. So a lot of work we've done is around public health or early childhood, and this was really about jobs. And so what we knew we needed to do was sort of expand the partnership. If parents wanted jobs, they knew they needed to go to college, they wanted careers, it meant we needed to bring in more formally, more intentionally new partners. The colleges, the community college, Washington County Community College and the University of Maine at Machias were key players in this response. The Department of Labor Career Centers, we needed that career counseling, those resources to help people find the training supports. And our economic development partner is also a very key partner who is looking at these issues around workforce participation, economic opportunity all the time.
Mm-hmm. And then so, quickly, then there's the child part. Mm-hmm. So what were you doing on the child side? You've been talking about the adult side.
Yeah. So when we had these listening sessions, we called them parent vision meetings, right? Really saying, you can envision the solution and we want to help you build it. They talked about the opportunity that they wanted to be able to go to college to get good jobs and have careers, but they also said, we want more skills around parenting, we want our children doing better. If we go to college, we need help with childcare. Right. And so we were able to sort of lift up what was sort of identified originally as a barrier, right? Like childcare, not having enough of it was a barrier. But what Family Futures Down East has been able to lift up is that the support around childcare actually is a very intentional support that creates, that improves outcomes for children. This is high quality early care and education that improves outcomes and school readiness and reaching developmental milestones. So that became a very intentional and additional sort of approach to help make sure parents who, in Family Futures Down East, what is happening is 7 organizations are formally partnered with a single shared MOU that took a long time to create, but it exists and it's a beautiful thing, to deliver the pieces of the program that we really see as the opportunity to go to college and get the career training and workforce training supports, And then the pieces of the program that we see as helping to like remove some of those barriers to the opportunity. So parents are in basically a really intensive year showing up at the University of Maine Machias or Washington County Community College in cohorts of about 10 or 15 families each. They're taking courses in the evening in classes that are made relevant to family life skills, and they are, across the course of a year, earning 15 credits toward a family studies certificate. And at the same time that they're there in the evening, their children are they're enrolled. It's co-occurring, just like you said, Jeannie, at the same time, high quality early care and education for the kiddos. And they have a meal together before classes, and the kids are in their jammies when it's time to go home. And it's really intentionally supporting parents and children at the same time.
That's great. At this point, I would like to bring in Dwayne, who is the Executive Director of Garrett County Community Action, Garrett County in Western Maryland, way out at the tip. And I'd love to hear a little bit about some of the same questions, their same issues. Give us a little bit of a picture of what Garrett County is like, and then we'll go into what caused you to move into the two-gen approach.
Well, thank you, Renee. And to give Renee some additional rural credentials, he was in Garrett County about 15 years ago, I believe, at a ruralist conference that we had in Garrett County.
Slept in a Murphy bed.
Slept in a Murphy bed. That was so. Garrett County is in Central Appalachia, and you know, we are rural too. 30,000 people. And you know, we have an economy that is primarily based on agriculture, tourism, light manufacturing, and extraction. Extraction meaning coal and timber. There is gas, but Maryland has a moratorium on all fracking, so there is no gas extraction in Garrett County. However, having said that, there is a lot of that in Pennsylvania and West Virginia and Ohio, and a lot of the jobs being created in Garrett County are actually built on that industry. So a lot of the employment that we're seeing actually is derived from that. But the thing I wanted to really point out about Garrett County that I think is a little different, over the last 15 years, the unemployment in Garrett County, the gap between the nation and the state of Maryland and the Garrett County unemployment rate disappeared. We now track the nation and track the state of Maryland. But what's interesting, so there have been job creation, very vigorous job creation. But what is also interesting is that the per capita income, the gap between the nation, the state of Maryland, Garrett County, on a per capita income basis, have remained constant. It has not changed. And so what that means, obviously, is that, yes, we have been successful and people are employed, but we have to figure out how we can help and create opportunity for people to actually get to the point where their living standard, their living wage meets what they need in order to have the quality of life that they're looking at. And similarly, and it's an interesting piece of data, we have about 75% of the people who are in our database, Garrett County Community Action, either have been unemployed for less than 6 months or are employed. To me, that means that people are moving in and out of poverty constantly. It is not something that is constant in terms of the thing, you know, being in poverty all the time. So from a point of view of trying to say how do we respond to that really has some significant impact on the way we respond to it. We, similarly to Charlie's comments, we have an aging population. Mm-hmm. We have had flat population growth for the last 30 years. Lack of growth. I guess flat population means no growth, right? So, no growth. The other issue, I think, for us anyway, is that we are 98% white, meaning that there's no diversity. And I think the lack of diversity is a deterrent on economic growth. And if you look around the country and see rural communities, a lot of the economic energy that's coming in those communities that are revitalizing comes from diversity and diversification. So I think that's a significant issue in terms of our community. Now, what was the catalyzing? What was the catalyst?
Thank you. You're all taking my job. This is great.
There was no trauma you know, 10 years prior to us getting involved in 2G, we had our largest employer left the community, and our unemployment went to 22%, and there was trauma, and everyone mobilized. And so community action went through a strategic planning thing and said, we're going to get involved in economic development, community development. 2G didn't come from that point of view. We simply started with a strategic planning process, and we asked our partners, our families, and our staff, employees, you know, why should community action exist? Where should we be? And what do we do well? What don't we do well? And you know, universally, we'd get answers like, well, you know, Head Start really helped my daughter. Or your transit vehicle should run 12 hours a day. Or you should be about building houses, step-down housing for seniors. It was not about what's your mission? Are you achieving your mission? And that hit us as we went through this planning process, and we said, you know, if we don't know whether we're meeting our mission, why are we there? I mean, we're doing pretty good at head counts. We were serving 100% of the eligible Head Start children in the county, but we couldn't really say, have we made the changes and helped families make the changes that they wanted and that they were dreaming about. And so that process, and it was, I would say, somewhat of a traditional strategic planning process, made us start thinking about what it would take to make that change. And it was from there that we started talking about, well, let me just talk a little bit about the mission, because I think that's one of the things you have to understand with the way, because it leads to my next point.
Sure.
We start by saying, let's make sure families are stable. Let's make sure that there are support services and that the community is able to respond in ways that families can maintain stability. Once that occurs, you can start having a discussion about asset building, whether it's an IDA or a homeowner or a balance sheet. You can start talking about assets. At the same time, if you're not helping the community to create opportunity, it doesn't do any good. So if you have families who are now doing better, but you have no jobs or you aren't building houses, you're just providing an opportunity for families to move out of the area and create opportunity outside of Garrett County. So that was the framework that we operated with in terms of our mission. And we started thinking about how we could track and look whether we were making that difference. And the process that we used, and this is sort of going to, you know, this is what it looks like, 2G looks like in Garrett County. Mm-hmm. We said the first thing that has to happen, and we've been there a long time. Garrett County Community Action has been an important player in Garrett County for almost since we've been there. So we looked at that and we said, let's start by saying anyone coming into any one of our doors, in any one of our locations, let's do one universal intake. Let's look at and let's invite those families to do an assessment. There is we're using a scale that's in your packet, by the way, something that's called a Crisis to Thrive. We're going to change the name, but it's now called a Crisis to Thrive scale. But the important part is this is an assessment that the families do of where they are. And then we invite families to do an action plan based on that. And then, because of the central intake and because of the technology we've developed, we can say, here is the bundle of services that will help you respond to the assessment, whether it's an opportunity or a need, or an action step that you have in your action plan. So that's the framework that we do. And we track that information. We spend a lot of time. Information technology, communication is a huge, huge issue for us. We spend a lot of investment in doing it, and so that's a large part of it. The other piece that I could spend 4 hours on is talking about how you change how people perceive what they're doing. Employees, your own employees. I mean, we rewarded people because they were great program managers, and they were getting great outputs from the programs. And funders did the same thing. but it was also the biggest obstacle to changing the way people looked at their job, because they said, you know, why fix something that isn't broke? And that was a constant. And we had to think about the integration of services across departments, across funding sources, and saying, how can all these services wrap around and create the outcome that families have said they want to achieve? And that framework and that shift in terms of how employees looked at their job was a big, big change and a major effort. So that's kind of the way that, I mean, that's the frame of how we, you know, what 2G looks like in our. Well, I should say this. The other thing, catalytic. I almost missed this. Rural communities are isolated, right? So when we did all this integration of services, Annie Casey pops up and says, Annie Casey Foundation pops up and said, well, you know, you're doing two-generation work. Ascend, and Mosley comes in and said, that really looks like two-generation work. Jeannie comes running into Garrett County with Doug one week and said, look, you're doing all this work. You need to be connected with other groups. And I will say, for rural communities that are isolated, the ability to connect with other practitioners and learning groups that were organized through OCS, organized through the Annie Casey Foundation and Ascend, was a major part of our shift. And that was a catalyst for making a lot of changes. And I can't tell you how much we learned from other groups all over the country because of the forums that were organized by these different outside groups. And I think having an outside group coming in and interjecting with, you know, in these isolated communities is a major, major rural issue for us.
So thank you for that, Dwayne. And we're going to focus in a little bit more shortly on how the partnerships work on a more local level in addition to that. What I want to do now is talk to somebody who's actually experienced two-generation on a more personal level. You have Shannon Davis here, who also lives in Garrett County, and I want to talk to her a little bit about what her situation was and what her story is. So, you have been a program participant approach participant at Garrett County Community Action, and could you tell us a little bit about where you were when you walked in their door?
It was September of 2017. Hi, I'm Shannon, by the way. Thank you. I was 7 months pregnant. I was homeless, and I was having some substance abuse issues. I was living in a hotel room, so my main goal at that moment, like, I just wanted a home. I just wanted a house. I have 2 older boys who are 6 and 4 now. And then I have my 14-month-old who's here with me today. He's not in the room. You would hear him if he was in the room. But yeah, I went there looking for housing, and I spoke with, mainly with Barbara Miller. She's the vice president there at Community Action. And right away, I got this connection with her, but she knew that I needed more than just housing, and I knew that too. But at that moment, I just wanted a home. I just wanted to, you know, have a place for me and my son. But yeah, that's why I went there. You know, that's when I went there for help.
So you went in the door. You had a number of problems coming
yeah,
in.
Number of problems.
You're pregnant first and foremost.
Yes.
You have a substance abuse issue, and you don't have a permanent home.
Yes.
So that's a lot of stuff to deal with.
It is.
You come in to try to deal with one problem, but
Okay.
Barbara sees that you need more. So
Yeah.
you expected to deal with one problem. So what did you actually get?
She actually drove me to a detox center herself, which was, I was shocked at first that she was actually going to do something like that, because a lot of places I've went to for help didn't really have that approach with me, and it helped. I completed the detox program, delivered a healthy baby, and then, you know, when I came back to, thank you.
Yes.
And then when I came back to Garrett County, I got right back in with Community Action, because the detox program was in Baltimore, so I stayed in the Baltimore area with family for about a month after he was born, and then when I went back home, I got right back in with Community Action.
Okay, so then you got the detox program, and then what did we do about the housing?
When I came back home, I was on a waiting list, but Community Action helped speed up that process, you know, going and seeing them every day. I was actually living with my father because I was clean, I had the baby, and so I was staying with him temporarily. But I have my own 3-bedroom apartment now. I have housing. I get help with energy assistance, a lot of help. With Barbara, actually, she did a self-esteem class, and that helped a lot because even I just had the baby and, you know, a little bit of depression going on and stuff like that. So that was a tremendous help. But yeah, I have my own place now. I have a car. The baby's healthy. I have visits with my boys. It's going really good. Everything's
And
going
you
really
didn't mention,
good.
you mentioned you had older boys, but because
They're
you had
in-
a substance issue,
Yes.
they were
They're
living
with
with
their father's mother, so they were living with their grandmother. But it's in Garrett County, so I see them twice a week. But I wasn't seeing them at all until.
So now you have a relationship, a
Yes.
better relationship
Oh,
with
yeah.
your kids. You are receiving public benefits. To get those benefits, you have to do some sort of work, right? So what
do,
are you
yes.
doing there to ensure that?
I have to do, in order to get my temporary cash assistance and my SNAP benefits, I have to do 20 hours a week to receive those benefits, and which is hard to do with the baby, but we got it done. And then I found out that Barbara had found a position, her and Dwayne had found a position for me to do photography because that's my passion. That's what I hope to do one day, is open up my own photography business, either in the Deep Creek Lake area or, you know, in the Oakland area. But I actually go from center to center, and I've taken pictures of the Head Start centers, of the senior centers. I've sat down and had lunch with the seniors. It was a good experience. And then I'm getting my hours as well, so it's, you know, helps.
So this is great. There's a lot of work that they're doing with you on the adult side. I know, in addition to Barbara is now watching your kids, so this duties as assigned is very large. But Dwayne also mentioned that there's assessments they do with your son. Are there other services that are being provided for your child?
Once a week, actually, from the Garrett County Health Department, and that's where the partnership adds up, I'm guessing. But yeah, I know they come in once a week and they help a lot. They do assessments on him. He just did his 12-month assessment 2 months ago, and he scored off the charts. So he's very intelligent. But they do come in once a week. They help with vouchers. She's brought me a voucher to help me get different items of furniture, different things for employment, helping do a resume. They do a lot. They come in once a week. So. And if you need transportation, which I don't now, I do have my own vehicle, but when I first got home, they helped with that as well.
So this is great. So you came in with one problem that you were focused in on. This was the big problem that was there. But because of the approach that Garrett County has now, they helped you and your son with a whole mess of problems.
Yes,
and you
most
came in there
definitely.
with a number of significant challenges that were sort of acting upon each other.
Yes, for sure.
So that's great.
Yes, it is. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I mean,
I've been clean for 15 months as well,
the audience here and the audience in live stream haven't had the opportunity to see your son, but he is, he's a lot of cuteness and a very lively, bright kid. Yeah, later. He'll be running this session if we just bring him in. But that's wonderful. So I want to sort of circle back to Charlie and Dwayne and ask them, the experience that Shannon's had sort of talks about the partnerships that are there. Can you talk about some of the top 2 or 3 partnerships and resources that have been critical for you in sort of making your 2-gen approach work happen?
Well, Shannon just teed that up perfectly for me because she mentioned the home visit, and for those of you who are familiar with this jargon, it's the Healthy Families Program, which is a home visiting program. Has a very rigid protocol in terms of its approach to things. But it is operated by the Garrett County Health Department, and they are a part of the partnership, the 2G partnership that we've created. The community college has picked up and has expanded and has become much more energetic with a workforce development as a result. And the partnership that I want to use as a flag, because it's a little different, is that as a part of all this work, and direct part of all this work, the county commissioner who had developed what they call a scholarship program, which basically said anyone coming out of any high school in Garrett County or home teaching can get 2 years of free tuition at the community college, but it was for people coming out of high school, so it was within the year. But they expanded that as a result of a 2G work and said, we will make the same scholarship available to anyone, regardless of age, who is participating in a vocational track for employment. And it was a unique Garrett County local government partnership, I think, with this whole 2G effort. But I mean, I just simply say that one of the things, you have to pay attention, you have to be very deliberate, very intentional about creating partnerships and defining what those roles are and doing agreements with your partners. But it can't happen without those partners.
Charlie, what's your experience with that?
So that's perfect, Dwayne. So for folks in the room, one of the handouts in your bundle there shows the configuration of partners and the contribution of each of those partners to the shared work of helping families find economic success, where parents are getting training and education opportunities and children are experiencing high quality early care and education. So we call this our many logos slide. This is each of the partners in Family Futures Down East and the specific contributions they have to the program. And that work just invited partners in our community who had strengths in terms of the response that parents needed. Mm-hmm. They had high quality early care and education services. They had the adult education programming that would help them get college prep they desperately asked for. Yeah. They had experience removing barriers to services and opportunities. But that's us. We fix cars so people can get there. Like that's necessary in terms of configuring the right partners. And within that, I just want to share, because it's a really important strategy. There are coaches working with each of the cohorts on the college campuses, and a coach in Family Futures Down East is a person who's that first point of contact. They're helping the participant, parent or child, enroll in all of these logos, right? There's a lot of enrollment that needs to happen, and they're helping remove those barriers. They're getting the estimate for the car repair and helping that all sort of come together at a time in a parent's life when they are making a huge leap. Yeah. It's a really big crossing to move on into a training program or onto a college campus. And so there's that emotional support that a coach offers as well. Yeah. It's a really key strategy to 2Gen. But just as Dwayne said, the partnerships are essential to making these efforts work for families, and the partners need to be really working together under a shared set of values, like you said. Other key partners, certainly the local, state, and national foundation partners who helped us get the effort off the ground while we were trying hard to figure out what public supports might really apply to this effort, might work for this effort. That was really important to have that investment from the foundation partners. And then over time, the relationship with state agency partners has resulted in some public sustaining funds to operate 2Gen programming in Maine. So that has been, those are all really key partnerships as we've moved this forward. And I'd be remiss, especially in this setting, if I didn't say that our relationship with the Economic Development Agency, specifically Sunrise County Economic Council, and their brilliant director, Charles Rutledge, he's a dear friend and colleague, their mission is about jobs and prosperity. Our mission is about health and well-being. These are complementary missions, right? We are coming together in a very intentional and aligned way for whole family economic success. And I don't know that social service, early childhood entities sit at the table with economic and workforce development and post-secondary partners all that often, but that has to happen. Yep. For 2G to really work. And it's been that Economic Development Agency and their vision to really help us bring that work together.
I want to Jeannie is gasping.
Yeah,
She's
I
got
do.
something
I
to
do,
say.
Renee. I just want to say that I think, what Charlie and Dwayne are talking about with the partnerships is that many communities have the components, the ingredients, the elements that they need. And 2Gen as a approach really allows us to bring those together and create something new and better. And what I think you can kind of see from Shannon talking is that when we really get clear about what families need, we know what those things are that we can bring together. Yeah. And so, our time today doesn't allow you to hear from Charlie how much listening they did with families. But listening with an ear towards change and doing something different is at the heart of sort of doing this work. So I want to make sure we don't lose that before time slips by today. But folks can do this almost any place. I think we've seen that if they listen to families and are willing to come together as a community and really think about how do we wrap love around parents and children together to help move them up and out and become economically secure. And I believe, and I've seen this in a lot of different places around the country, I'm privileged to have a view to be able to see that you can do this almost anywhere if you get the right folks together and you listen to families and you design alongside of them and with them.
That's great. We are, speaking of time, we got to be a little bit succinct here, but I would like to get from Dwayne and from Charlie, if we've got folks who are out in live stream land and maybe folks in the audience who are thinking about running programs themselves, or starting this approach themselves, and wonder if you have a piece of advice or two for someone who is about to take the 2G approach and bring it to their community, or is considering it.
I'm happy to. Jeannie just shared the piece of advice that I would begin with. You have to listening to families and bringing community organizations together. That's exactly the advice that I would offer. So
sorry, Charlie.
No, I'm really glad you said it because in the spirit of time, that works well. But I would also say that the result of that, when you listen to parents and their kids, right? Listen to whole families, and when you assemble the partners, the organizational partners who can build that response. And highlight always that the parents and the partners have made contributions that are critical for the success of the effort. Then in the end, you have this pile of people who want to fight for the success of the effort because they were heard and they know that what they contribute is critical to the success of the effort and of families. And so that you build this really. You build this really powerful community momentum around families when you use that process.
That's great. Dwayne?
Well, I'm thinking about, you get into, you start talking about practical things in terms of how you start and all that. But and Charlie did a nice job of saying, there's a bigger overarching kind of thing. And the one thing that I always think about is if you really listen, if you're listening, Shannon's example. So here is a person who said she needed housing, right? Yes. But it was important to understand she's a creative person. She's a photographer. She has these assets and these opportunities that are as important to respond to as trying to find a house. And so that part of it is really, and anyone can do that. That's just a matter of applying yourself.
Mindset,
yeah. And so that's an important part. For us, the one thing that we had to start with that I think can be done is we pulled together different groups who started to talk about what are the outcomes we want to track. We didn't talk about results yet or anything like that, but what are the actual outcomes? And that kind of work, that gets down into the weeds pretty deep sometimes. But it's an important piece, and it's a first step, because if you don't know what you're going to track, you just don't know where you're going, right? And so my advice in terms of starting is to focus on those outcomes that you want, and you don't have to invent the world to do that. You just pick a couple that you know that you want to track and watch and work on, and start with that, and pull the right people together to do that. That's families, that's employees, and that's partners.
That's very helpful. Charlie, has something to go.
I would quickly echo, Dwayne, that building your evaluation into the design, like from day one, was the work we also did. Parents, we want jobs so we can pay our bills. We can measure income and employment. Like we can measure that, right? So picking a couple, and because we had a pretty well developed universe of performance measures, like of metrics, as we designed it, when it was time to partner really closely with our state agency partners, we were ready to say, this is what we're measuring. If when that work was happening around contracting and stuff, and we didn't have those outcomes in place, it's a new field. They didn't necessarily have the outcomes in place either, right? So we did. We knew what we wanted to measure, and having that done up front helped a lot in terms of moving sustainability efforts forward.
That's helpful. I want to let folks know we're going to be going to questions in about 5 minutes. So if you out there and you have questions in live stream land, you can send them through #RuralInnovation. And folks in the audience, please get yours ready. Before we go that, I'd like to ask Jeannie if she could talk a little bit about some of the structures that can either help or hinder the development of a two-gen effort in communities.
Right. Well, I think one of the structures that can hinder, and we've sort of touched on it many different ways today, is that if you're sort of operating programs in silos, if you're not integrating in an organization, if you're not coordinating with others in your community, if you're a child-focused program and you're sort of just doing your early childhood kind of work, and you're not thinking about how to serve the parent better and meet them where they are, meet them where they are dreaming, then that can really hinder, I think, you having sort of this more impactful work that we're talking about today. So I think that's definitely one thing. I also think sort of a structure that can limit us is not playing the long game. Janet, you talked about that in your introduction, that this is really, a long game that we're playing here. And if we're audacious enough to think that we can take breaking the cycle of intergenerational poverty on, then that is going to be a long game, right? But the neuroscience again, and what we know about mobility in places, I think really call to us to play that long game. So I just would sort of challenge folks to, don't let structures that sort of require immediate, response to get in the way. All of the funding that so many people get for different programs really keeps us in those silos and sometimes makes us play that short game.
Sure.
But I think get out of the grants management driven model that maybe you're in and get into the Shannon driven model that we have here. I think that'd be helpful.
The family drives it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So could you talk a little bit about, we're going to go to questions briefly, talk a little bit about how the difference in being in a rural environment affects what you do on a two-gen approach, and be that things that are advantages and things that are extra challenges.
Well, I mentioned isolation, and I think that's a big factor. I looked at the history, the trajectory of our organization. There were two events that had outside intervention. One was in 1995 when we had this big unemployment thing, and we went from to a community economic development initiative, and that came because we became a part of Rural Lift, and that changed the way we did business. And then this event, which same thing, we had Ascend, we had KC, the anti-KC, and we had Rural Impact, all jumped in and helped change. So that intervention, and I think rural communities, you need to make sure that they have opportunity to connect with other groups across the country. So that's one thing. But the two other things is, and Charlie and I were talking, I believe that rural communities, there is a culture of collaboration in rural communities that grows out of their size or smallness, I guess, is a way of putting it. And that's unique, I think, for many rural communities. It's been very, 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 very important to Garrett County, let me put it that way. But it is also true, and we saw this in the opening presentation, that we're also working with lower incomes. So if you're looking at building an affordable house, you have to make it affordable to a lower income than you would otherwise, and it's still costing the same to build that house. So that lower income is an issue that is a significant challenge, at least as we get into our work.
Charlie, how does a rural context affect your two-gen work?
I mean, we're in a lot of relationships, right? Like overlapping relationships, and so the quality of the relationship is really important. And you're right about the culture of collaboration, Dwayne. And I'll say that this particular collaborative is for Family Futures Down East includes organizations of really different size and scale. There are, we're a collaborative with a fiscal sponsor. There's an economic development agency that's a 501c3, and then there's large state, system affiliated organizations with, the community college or the Department of Labor. And so figuring out how we all work together in that sort of different, our schedules are different, our who we report to is different, the legal folks looking over that memorandum of agreement are different, right? Like, so that we really have to be in very intentional relationships with one another. And there isn't another early childhood partner that we could necessarily partner with to deliver the key component that is high quality early care and education if we didn't have our community action partner. So the quality of that relationship with community action is so important. We're in the long game for families, but we're also in the long game for collaboration. So, and we also are in the same grocery store. We see each other, right? Like we are really in relationship. Our kids are in school together, or we're, so there's an accountability to one another that we share as collaborating partners, but as community members as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Well,
Renee?
that's very helpful. I'm going to
Time for questions.
It is definitely time for questions. Janet, if anyone in the room have
Anyone
questions?
in the room have a question? Okay, we'll start here, and then I've already got a couple from cyberspace.
Okay.
Hashtag
Yeah. Rural innovation.
rural innovation. Okay. Please tell everyone who you are and where you're from.
Jaya Lent with Generations United, and we look at issues that connect older and younger generations. And so my question is, when you talk about a two-generation strategy, to what extent are you thinking about extended family members? And particularly, Shannon, congratulations. And you mentioned that your older boys are with their father's parents. And we know that increasingly grandparents step in both to play a supportive role and sometimes a full-time caregiving role when their parents are recovering from substance use or other issues. So if you could speak to that.
Yeah. I think we say parents, that's a stand-in for all the important caretaking people in a child's life. So when we say child, and it's those caretakers. It might be a parent, it might be a grandparent. I think, some two-gen efforts around the country are really focused on also making sure that, child care workers are, those are important people in a young child's life. So I think there's no cookie cutter approach to this, as I said earlier, and you need to really be driven by what's happening in your community and with your families. So.
Well, I mean, Shannon can talk to this too, but I think it's a bit of a misnomer. It's a whole family, and I was visiting the
Cook Inlet tribe in Alaska.
In Alaska. And their concept of family was, much different, but it fit perfectly with the two-generation effort. I think we use the term incorrectly.
So, question for Shannon from Anonymous. So, I don't know.
Anonymous.
What was the most important aspect or thing that made you keep coming back to community action? Why did you keep coming back?
Barbara Miller. Most definitely.
Barbara Miller's in the room, I might add, along with Carson, the 14-month-old.
The relationship that I've formed with her was definitely a big aspect of me my returning to community action. I could just, I could trust her. And I've had addiction problems and, poverty problems for years and never had a relationship like I do with her. So that was
good
to
Thanks.
have.
There were some questions over here.
I was going to quickly, Jen, I wanted to add, Charlie had mentioned having somebody help guide folks through all this myriad of relationships. Folks have been talking about 2Gen at Aspen for the last 2 days, and I do think that it's very often having somebody who can help someone navigate just complicated things, just often such a big help. And I'm sorry.
Hi, sorry. I'm overwhelmed because these counties you talk about are 4 times the population of the counties that I'm working in.
Could you let folks know who you are?
I'm sorry, Ann Yeoman. I'm an independent consultant and I work primarily in asset building. And right now in children's savings accounts. And my question is related to outcomes and what you're going to measure, so forth, and the long game. So for children's savings accounts, it's a long game. For families, gradually getting their assets and income and all those things in order. But my very specific question is, looking at this transition model and whatever, are there examples that any of you are aware of where the children and the parents together set their goals?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming when they're age 3, it's a little difficult, but as they get older, yes. And if so, kind of how do you make that happen? That's part of what we're trying to integrate into what we're calling a CSA, but it's really a parent-child thing. So at what stage and how do you get them to, as a family, agree these are the things that are going to be important, because there are obviously all kinds of family dynamics and whatever.
Thank you, Ann.
Well, I have just made a mental note to do something new because of your comments. Because we do not, we work probably with the parents in terms of doing the assessment, where families think they are, doing, creating, defining their aspirations. It relies on the adult almost always, and we haven't really involved older young children or children that could be engaged with that kind of a conversation. I don't know if that actually happens in a home visiting setting where you have a little different environment, but we don't in terms of the child and in terms of doing an action plan and an assessment.
We're moving in that direction, and it's going to require a lot of communication. And that communication will be between the early education staff and the Family Futures Down East coach and the family, parent and children, where the goal is for goal setting. The goal for goal setting is for parents to really be at the wheel, right? So there's forms where parents are outlining their goals across domains. It might be household, child, employment and career, education, transportation. And as they build, especially those child goals, it's important that the early education staff who are supporting those goals in learning centers, the coach who's helping the parent really figure out that a lot of this is more than childcare, right? This is about high quality early care and education that changes outcomes for children. So that, but just, it's actually really trying and challenging to get folks in the same room to do that really quality meeting where the shift is and it's a big shift for practitioners, is the parent is driving the conversation.
Just a quick,
you go, Dwayne, and then Jean.
Well, a quick comment. I mean, we have there are goals and outcomes that we track for children and correlate with families and so on. But actually engaging children in that process is what we haven't really done well.
Very quickly, I would say that the fabulous Sarah Haight is in the back of the room here, and she's with Ascend. And Ascend definitely is a hub to go to look, to answer very specific questions like that, Anne. And I would say connect up with the Ascend staff, and they can probably give you, 2 or 3 really good places around the country that are already doing that. There's no need to slug this out alone. If you're out there, reach out to Ascend or to folks like Dwayne and Charlie who are actually on the ground doing work.
So another question from cyberspace, Jordan Catcher via YouTube. For Charlie, hello from Utah. Our office has launched a rural coordinating council among 25 plus entities, and I wanted to ask what advice you can give to sustaining collaboration among so many partners. And an addendum to that from Jordan as well. Any advice on the MOU process, the Memorandum of Understanding process, how they communicate with one another, et cetera, would be greatly appreciated. Now, just to remind everyone, as Charlie said, they have a signed MOU of 7 different organizations that have agreed to different responsibilities in Family Futures Down East 2Gen effort. And this is a big thing to get 7 organizations to sign on a MOU with clear responsibilities. I've seen it, and it's a revelation to other 2Gen programs we've shown it to. So, Charlie, could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think building that multi-agency collaboration, I mean, the Community Caring Collaborative has been working to do that for a long time. And one of the things that we do is we, as conveners, are really mindful of taking care of our partners. In some ways, we shorten our mission to say that we take care of the people who take care of the people. And they are actually very connected to one another around shared goals, but it's helping them orient around that goal, that building a shared vision and shared goals is really important work, and it takes time. It's not slow, it's not quick work. So I would add that one of the things we do often, and I think is really helpful, is we provide a lot of training and technical assistance around key values that you want those partners to align around. So we are delivering free training with high quality experts, local, in our county, that support professional development, calendars for the agencies, but build skills, build knowledge, and build shared values. And that is just, it's just part of the glue, right, that holds a collaborative together, is that agreement that we care about understanding the impacts of poverty. We care about understanding the impacts of substance use so that together we can help resolve some of that. The MOU took a while, I'll say that. And one of the things I think a good collaborative can do, or a person like sort of intermediary who's helping move that forward, you sort of take the best that we know about strengths-based approaches, and we do strengths-based approaches with participants in programs. We want to know everything you're good at, because you're good at photography, and we're going to start there, right? A convener does that with the organization. We are strengths-based about our partners, and we start there. You are so good at welcoming families onto your college campus already. We want to grow that. Mm-hmm. Like that it's a strengths-based approach at the program level.
Okay. We have time for maybe
one more. One more. Over here. She had her hand up earlier, so.
Hi, my name is Jackie Edwards, and I'm from the Pascal Sykes Foundation, and we're based in New Jersey. And we provide funding to 10 collaborative groups implementing the whole family approach to Gen. You talked about the need for transportation and also the lack of jobs. At our foundation, we fund transportation in the rural county of Southern Jersey and an economic development initiative as well to create jobs and also provide transportation. Have you thought of, or has anyone reached out to any corporations or anyone to try and get them to come into your communities to create jobs?
Charlie?
You go, Dwayne.
Well, to begin with, on the economic development side, I mean, our role has been to engage with other key players. We've actually done some created ventures, but we've invested in job creating kinds of activities. But we're not the primary lead in that, but we are very engaged, for instance, with the whole strategic planning process with the County Economic Development Office and a number of private business entities. So our role has been primarily just to make sure that what I call low-income interests are very much a part of those processes. But I wouldn't say that we've been the lead in terms of going out creating new jobs. We have relationships with employers where we help connect families to jobs, but I mean, as the lead entity, probably that's not been the case.
Charlie, we've got like a minute. Do you have anything to add?
So quickly, we're not in a situation. We're in a situation right now where we have a lot of unfilled positions across sectors and at multiple levels of education and skill. So the approach, and so it's the workforce shortage that's the challenge. And so the approach that we're taking and that our economic development partner is taking is to invest in the workers to help build their skills and their potential so they can engage in that workforce. And I'll tell you that it's a transformational shift in the narrative where we are saying to low-income community members that we care about them and their children and their future, and we believe they are an essential component of the future of our region. Mm-hmm. That is not what low-income community members usually do.
Because you mentioned that you, at the college, the university, you give a family studies certificate. Who accepts that, and does that help with the job shortage?
Could you repeat her question?
So does the certificate, the family studies certificate, transfer into a job? It is not something that transfers directly into a job. What is happening with Family Futures Down East is that investment in that first year of college is resulting in their staying in college at a really exciting rate. Like 90% of participants who are low-income, non-traditional parenting students have a fall-to-fall persistence rate of 90%, and they're staying in 2- and 4-year degree programs.
Woohoo!
That's awesome. So, I mean, one of the things I wanted to have folks talk about is just, for somebody who's looking for an organization that's looking to adopt the 2-gen approach, I know some of this may seem like it's a lot of work, a lot of coordination, and you wonder whether it's worth it. But I think we have some evidence here.
Well, we have some evidence here, and Carson is going to join
young
his
ambassador
mom
up here.
And this is, bringing Carson up is the now famous Barbara Miller.
and you can think back to the story that Shannon told us. She's 7 months pregnant with this young man. Now it's 14 months yeared out, and the series of things that Garrett County Community Action introduced herself to, the housing would not have been enough. But look at this.
Yes, it's worth it.
So, I think Jeannie said something earlier about this is about wrapping love around families, and I think we're seeing love wrapped around right now. And I want to thank you and wrap some love around Jeannie, Dwayne, Shannon, Charlie, Jess, and Renee for being here today. I want to thank our colleagues at Ascend, especially Sarah Haid, who's been sitting in the room the whole time, who do the heavy lifting for the 2-gen field. And I want to alert you to the fact that we have another collaborative here, 2-gen ACT, 2-gen Accelerating Capacity and Tools, that Aspen CSG is coordinating with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, the Annie Casey Foundation, and Ascend. And we are sponsoring a site visit to Garrett County Community Action May 29th to 30th. And if you are on the mailing list that got the invite to this, you will be getting that invite if you haven't already. You have to apply. This is going to be an organized and guided site visit, 2-day site visit, and you have to apply. We can only accept 15 teams, but we're looking for community teams of 3 to 5 members of places that want to deepen their 2-gen sort of work or start it. So please look for that and see if you can be one of the 15 lucky community teams selected to participate. And finally, I want to say thank you to the Rural Development Innovation Group, of which we are part, for its leadership and partnership in organizing this series. And to remind you that we know a healthy and more prosperous America requires a healthy, prospering rural America. And that won't happen without close attention to the range of innovation that is already happening in rural and expanding it and supporting it. So please stay tuned for our next America's Rural Opportunity session, which is going to be in a couple months. It's a dialogue we're going to conduct on the road out west somewhere in partnership with the Rural Voices for Conservation Coalition. So for now, anticipate spring and invest in rural America. Thank you.